Grieving is a difficult process at any time, but the holidays can be particularly painful for people dealing with the recent or impending death of a loved one. Dr. Helen Harris is an associate professor in the Garland School of Social Work at Baylor University. She's an expert on grief and social relations and has served as social worker and bereavement coordinator in hospice care. Dr. Harris, we're so pleased that you could join us today for this very important topic.
Thank you.
It is supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year, but holidays in particular can truly compound grief. Why do special events, life milestones, heighten that sense of loss?
It's a great question. Thank you. I think that one thing we need to remember about holidays is that they're special because they include family gatherings. They include an opportunity to be together. They are times when we make memories, memories that sustain us during hard times. And so when dying is happening or when grief is happening during the holidays, it feels particularly like something has been taken away from us. And I think that sort of threat to the opportunity to make memories and have joy and happiness and good times together is part of what steals the joy from us. If we can recognize instead that happiness and joy are not the same, and we aren't happy about the circumstance that we find ourselves in, but we do have an opportunity as we gather to honor the life of the person who's died, if we're grieving, to honor the life of the person who's dying, if that in fact is happening. We have a chance perhaps to say the things we want to say, and the holiday gives us actually a reason to do that, maybe in writing or maybe in speaking with that person. We have the opportunity to focus on all the good, the family memories, to tell family stories together, I think to use the holiday to highlight not the negative, but the importance of that life and those relationships.
Well, the impact of grief is truly multifaceted. Is the average person prepared for how it affects the physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of our lives?
Well, the truth is that most of us think about grief with sort of the old paradigms, the thought that grief is a linear process with stages and that it affects us primarily emotionally. The truth is we have some new research that suggests that grief affects us in all the dimensions of our lives. Kenneth Doka, Charles Core, others have written about this. There's a spiritual impact of grief. Whatever our worldview or belief system is, can be threatened by the thought of the end of life or the loss of folks. And not just in grief that comes from death and dying, but grief that comes from ambiguous loss, divorces, for example, or deployments of parents who are in the military, incarceration of parents. Broken relationships can include a lot of grief as well. And we can wonder, how does a loving God let these things happen to us? Why do bad things happen? And I think that spiritual impact can be profound and needs to be addressed. Grief also affects us cognitively, which I think a lot of folks don't think about. When we're grieving, we can be really stressed. And it's harder to concentrate. It's harder to learn new material. It's particularly hard for students in school to pay attention. And I've done some research on possible implications of grief in diagnoses of ADHD as children are distracted by the powerful thoughts and intrusive thoughts and overwhelming sadness. Grief can affect us physically as well. It's a challenge to our immune system when our bodies are stressed. Children can feel particularly cold. One thing that happens when we're stressed is our blood flow goes to our internal organs, and kids who never need a jacket might need a jacket or a blanket at night. We're more vulnerable to illness, to flu and stomach bugs and colds and things like that. And so it's really important to pay attention to ourselves physically. And I think for parents to know that for children as well, to consider that this might be a time to make sure that we're getting a healthy diet, that we're getting an adequate amount of sleep. But when we don't care one thing about exercise, it's particularly important to take care of ourselves physically and exercise. And part of what we know is that exercise produces natural endorphins, which actually can help us with sadness and depression and with grief. Grief also affects us socially. Our social networks are different when someone is gone. What happens, when the person who carved the turkey is not at the table this year, or the person who lit the menorah candles is not here this year, and so those relationships are different, and it's really important that we acknowledge that grief affects us in all those dimensions of our lives, and then make some plans for how we're going to take care of ourselves in all of those areas.
Important aspects of grief to truly be conscious of. And now we look at during the pandemic, the incidence of people dying alone without family members present has also been a significant factor. It's also dramatically altered our funeral rituals. What impact do those factors have on the grieving process?
Yeah, the pandemic has been awful in so many ways, and the ways that it's isolated all of us has been very challenging. And I think that's particularly true when people are in the hospital, and not family members can't be present for the end of their lives. One of the things that I encountered in my work in hospice is that there were times when people lived at a far distance and couldn't be present with family members. And that's when we first discovered the importance of technology in ways to be present without physically being present. And I think one of the great gifts we might think about is that we do have an opportunity for us to speak like this. We have nurses and medical professionals, healthcare providers who are so sensitized to this, who will make arrangements to do a FaceTime meeting or a WhatsApp meeting, or use the technology, a Zoom meeting like this, to be able to help people connect and see one another and speak with one another. It's not the same as touching and holding, and I don't want to minimize that at all. But I think that we are so blessed to have ways that we can connect, and it's very important that we use those for that end of life work. That we are able to say to a dying parent or a dying child how much we love them, that we'll be okay, that we'll miss them, but our intent and our purpose is to be a living legacy for them, to keep their memory alive, to hold dear the values that they've taught us. All those messages we still have an opportunity to share. I think it's really important too to pay attention to the stress and the toll that being present at so many deaths has taken on our healthcare workers. And how hard it is for funeral directors to not be able to offer the sort of normative rituals that they're able to offer for comfort and help. And for those of us in the helping professions to reach out to them as well. For families to be patient, to know that what we cannot do now, we can do in some ways when this pandemic is over. And so to to hold closely the opportunity to gather as families when this is over, to ritualize the telling of stories. And I think even now, for us to gather and tell the stories of the life of the person who's died, to keep their memories alive, to capture the stories while they're fresh on our minds. I think those are all things that we can do that make a difference.
Well, we certainly know that death does not take a holiday. For those who know death will come soon but don't know exactly when, the festive season can be particularly difficult. Do we approach anticipatory grief in the same way?
I think one of the things we know about anticipatory grief is that it includes all those same dimensions I mentioned earlier, and that maybe the myth and fallacy is that if we do our grieving before the death happens, that it's easier afterwards. And I would say that that's not been my experience. That we still have the same grief work to do, the same adjustment to that person not being present in our life to do, even when we knew ahead of time that the death was coming. The gift of anticipatory grief is the opportunity to take care of unfinished business, to say the things that we want to say while we have an opportunity to say them, and not later regret that we didn't take advantage of that. and to hear the things we need to hear. And that means being able to say, Grandpa, if this doesn't go as well as I hope it does, there's some things I wish you'd tell me about your life when you were younger. I want to know more about what made you the courageous person that you are, or the person who always showed up for work, or whatever those values are that a grandchild might admire. To hear the family stories, to give an opportunity for persons who are at the end of their lives to do not only some of that review, but passing on some of that generational wisdom. Anticipatory grief is hard, but it also holds with it some strengths and some opportunities that we can take advantage of, I think. The warning, the awareness that death is coming, and the courage to say, I don't know when anyone's going to die. I've worked with hospice patients who were very, very ill. Their prognosis was very grim, and who've gotten better and done well for a long time and were discharged from the hospice program. I've known other people who weren't ill at all and had a precipitous event, a cardiac event or a car wreck or whatever, and suddenly were gone. And so the message of making today count is not just one of anticipatory grief, but one for all of us to know when we gather for the holidays, we have an opportunity to say, let's make an ornament for everybody here while we're together, and hang them on the tree and tell one special story about each person, or, whatever family traditions folks might have, where they lift up and honor one another and create memories and share stories together.
Well, grief is a very personal process, and people experience that process in very different ways. It's said there's no right way, there's no wrong way, but how can we be assured that someone is processing grief in a healthy manner?
Well, I agree with you that there's no right way. It really, there isn't a prescription. We know a lot from research that's been done about some common responses of folks. And so one of the things we're able to do is help people understand, I don't know what you're experiencing, but because other people have shared with me what they've experienced, and because I've done some reading and research, there are some things you might encounter that it might help to be aware of ahead of time. I think the other thing we're always looking at is not just to normalize the grief experience, because it is a normal healing process for us, not easy, not pleasant, but normal. If I break my leg and I have to go to the emergency room and get my leg set, it's not going to be a happy experience, and it probably will involve some pain, and it's certainly going to involve some discomfort and lack of normality while I'm on crutches, or have to be on a scooter, or whatever happens as that bone heals. But one of the things I need to remember is that I was born with the capacity to heal. The cast around my leg does not heal that bone. What heals the bone is the capacity my body has to bring calcium from other places and put it in that broken place and strengthen, and in fact to the place where that place in the bone is stronger than the bone around it. And grief is much like that. It is painful, and it can change what we're able to do for a while, and it affects our daily life. But as that healing, which comes from the inside out, happens, it happens partly because there's support around it. I think about a cast on a broken leg being support that holds things in place. And I think about family and friends and pastors and ministers and rabbis and, folks that are support systems for us, are the folks who kind of hold things in place, keep things steady, so that the healing that happens inside us naturally can happen without a lot of disruption. When people don't have that kind of support, it's really important that those of us who know them and care for them begin to come alongside and provide it. I think it also matters that we pay attention to how much dysfunction they might be experiencing. It's hard to sleep for some folks when they're grieving. Some folks sleep a lot when they're grieving, to know what that person's kind of norm is. But when somebody is not eating, not sleeping, having nightmares, experiencing persistent feelings of sadness, maybe even wondering what the point of being alive is, I think, at that point, it really is time to say, and when the leg's broken, we need some professional help. And when our hearts are broken, we might need to talk with somebody about that. And there's a time when we get more support than folks may have at that point. And to be tuned into that matters. But that can't happen if we're not checking on people. And so to remember that grief doesn't happen just right when the loss happens. In fact, when there's a death, the whole first year after that loss is one loss after another. The first Christmas, the first Thanksgiving, the first New Year's, the first family reunion, the first anniversary, the first birthday, my dad's birthday. All those are painful and difficult times because it's the first time without that person. And so if I know that about someone, I can reach out to them on those dates. Maybe I send a card and say, I've just been thinking about you this week because I know your anniversary is coming up and I want you to know that I care and I'm here, and maybe we could go get a cup of coffee together when the pandemic is over, or maybe we could have a Zoom meeting and have a cup of coffee together online. But to even have a bereavement calendar in my home where I've marked down the dates of those people that matter to me, that might be difficult for them, and then I reach out intentionally. I think that's the kind of help we can provide, where rather than saying everybody's grief is alike or everybody's grief should be different, we say, I know that what is specific in your life might be particularly hard right now. And because I care, I want you to know I'm here and you're not alone. You're not doing this alone. Some years ago, my friend's son had died when he was 9 of leukemia, and his birthday was coming up, and high school graduation, his 18th birthday was coming up, and high school graduation for his cohort was coming up. And I called her and said, can we go to lunch? So we're sitting at lunch, and I said, I just want you to know I've been thinking about Johnny a lot. And she began to cry. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. I've hurt you and upset you. I'm sorry I brought it up. And she said, no, Helen, no one ever mentions his name. My son is gone, and I think about him every day. And it's a gift to me that you remember him as well. These tears are not bad tears. These are just real expressions of what it means to be without my son right now. Thank you for saying it. And that so stuck with me that I think if people don't want us to bring it up, it's okay to say to them, if you don't want me to bring this up, then, I absolutely will honor that. But may I just let you know that I'm thinking about him too.
Well, those are certainly some very productive and helpful ways to support someone who is grieving. Is it different at the holiday season? Is there anything else we can be doing over the holidays, or is it very much the same as what you've just described?
I think it's the same and more intense, right? Because we have traditions and memories, and we have so many expectations at the holidays. Everything is bright and twinkly with lights, and we expect to get together as family, and we expect gifts, and we expect the chance to bless others with gifts, and all those expectations get kind of crushed when bad things happen at the holidays, or when there are empty seats at the table over the holidays. I think it's really important, first of all, to speak that, to acknowledge it, to just say, I know this is coming, and I know it could be hard, and here's what I think will be hard. And then to think about what might make it better. One of the things I do, we have a mantle over the fireplace, and I put the nativity set up there at Christmas, but I also put a memory candle on there. And so when we gather, and this year when we don't gather, except on Zoom, and then I'll take the camera around and show everybody. But I light that candle at the beginning of the day. It's particularly for me, for my grandmother, who was the most formative, important person in my life. And I say, this is the way Oma's presence is with us today. I know that her presence, I know that her memory is here. I know that her her love is here because I don't believe love dies. And so I want just to acknowledge that, and the candle is on. If that is hard for you to look at, then don't. It's fine not to look at it. If it's helpful for you to look at it, then gaze with me. If you see me look at it, know that it's a comfort to me to remember her. I have ornaments on my tree with my dad's name and my mom's name, and those that I've lost through the years. And as we tell family stories, if there's one I haven't heard before, I write it down. I try and capture those. I think those are all ways of building into the holiday the richness of the life lived rather than the pain of the life gone.
Some really valuable insights, Dr. Harris. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us on Newspoint 360 today about a very difficult subject.
Grateful for the opportunity, and just want to send out love and joy and good vibes to all those this season who are hurting, with a reminder that your pain matters, and your capacity and resilience for growing through it and ministering and being there for other people is a joy and a blessing to all of us.